Chapter 4. A Visit to an Old Bachelor. A few days after, a note came from Mr. Holbrook, asking us, impartially, asking both of us, in a formal, old-fashioned style, to spend a day at his house, a long June day, for it was June now. He named that he had also invited his cousin, Miss Pole, so that we might join in a fly, which could be put up at his house. I expected Miss Matty to jump at this invitation, but no. Miss Pole and I had the greatest difficulty in persuading her to go. She thought it was improper, and was even half annoyed when we utterly ignored the idea of any impropriety in her going with two other ladies to see her old lover. Then came a more serious difficulty. She did not think Deborah would have liked her to go. This took us half a day's good hard talking to get over. But at the first sentence of relenting, I seized the opportunity and wrote and dispatched an acceptance in her name, fixing day and hour that all might be decided and done with. The next morning, she asked me if I would go down to the shop with her, and there, after much hesitation, we chose out 3 caps to be sent home and tried on, that the most becoming might be selected to take with us on Thursday. She was in a state of silent agitation all the way to Woodley. She had evidently never been there before, and, although she little dreamt I knew anything of her early story, I could perceive she was in a tremor at the thought of seeing the place which might have been her home, and round which it is probable that many of her innocent, girlish imaginations had clustered. It was a long drive there, through paved, jolting lanes. Miss Matilda sat bolt upright and looked wistfully out of the windows as we drew near the end of our journey. The aspect of the country was quiet and pastoral. Woodley stood among fields, and there was an old-fashioned garden where roses and currant bushes touched each other, and where the feathery asparagus formed a pretty background to the pinks and gillyflowers. There was no drive up to the door. We got out at a little gate and walked up a straight, box-edged path. "My cousin might make a drive, I think," said Miss Pole, who was afraid of earache, and had only her cap on. "I think it is very pretty," said Miss Matty, with a soft plaintiveness in her voice, and almost in a whisper, for just then Mr. Holbrook appeared at the door, rubbing his hands in very effervescence of hospitality. He looked more like my idea of Don Quixote than ever, and yet the likeness was only external. His respectable housekeeper stood modestly at the door to bid us welcome, and while she led the elder ladies upstairs to a bedroom, I begged to look about the garden. My request evidently pleased the old gentleman, who took me all round the place and showed me his 26 cows named after the different letters of the alphabet. As we went along, he surprised me occasionally by repeating apt and beautiful quotations from the poets, ranging easily from Shakespeare and George Herbert to those of our own day. He did this as naturally as if he were thinking aloud, and their true and beautiful words were the best expression he could find for what he was thinking or feeling. To be sure, he called Byron my Lord Byron, and pronounced the name of Goethe strictly in accordance with the English sound of the letters. As Goethe says, ye ever verdant palaces, etc. Altogether, I never met with a man, before or since, who had spent so long a life in a secluded and not impressive country, with ever-increasing delight in the daily and yearly change of season and beauty. When he and I went in, we found that dinner was nearly ready in the kitchen, for so I suppose the room ought to be called, as there were oak dressers and cupboards all round, all over by the side of the fireplace, and only a small Turkey carpet in the middle of the flag floor. The room might have been easily made into a handsome dark oak dining parlor by removing the oven and a few other appurtenances of a kitchen which were evidently never used, the real cooking place being at some distance. The room in which we were expected to sit was a stiffly furnished, ugly apartment, but that in which we did sit was what Mr. Holbrook called the counting house, where he paid his laborers their weekly wages at a great desk near the door. The rest of the pretty sitting room, looking into the orchard, and all covered over with dancing tree shadows, was filled with books. They lay on the ground, they covered the walls, they strewed the table. He was evidently half ashamed and half proud of his extravagance in this respect. They were of all kinds, poetry and wild, weird tales prevailing. He evidently chose his books in accordance with his own tastes, not because such and such were classical or established favorites. "Ah," he said, "we farmers ought not to have much time for reading, yet somehow one can't help it." "What a pretty room," said Miss Matty, softly. "What a pleasant place," said I, aloud, almost simultaneously. "Nay, if you like it," replied he, "but can you sit on these great black leather three-cornered chairs? I like it better than the best parlor, but I thought ladies would take that for the smarter place." It was the smarter place, but, like most smart things, not at all pretty or pleasant or homelike. So, while we were at dinner, the servant girl dusted and scrubbed the counting-house chairs, and we sat there all the rest of the day. We had pudding before meat, and I thought Mr. Holbrook was going to make some apology for his old-fashioned ways, for he began, "I don't know if you like new-fangled ways." "Oh, not at all," said Miss Matty. "No more do I," said he. "My housekeeper will have these in her new fashion, or else I tell her that, when I was a young man, we used to keep strictly to my father's rule, no broth, no ball, no ball, no beef, and always began dinner with broth. Then we had suet puddings, boiled in the broth with the beef, and then the meat itself. If we did not sup our broth, we had no ball, which we liked a deal better, and the beef came last of all, and only those had it who had done justice to the broth and the ball. Now folks begin with sweet things, and turn their dinners topsy-turvy. When the ducks and green peas came, we looked at each other in dismay. We had only two-pronged, black-handled forks. It is true, the steel was as bright as silver, but what were we to do? Miss Matty picked up her peas one by one on the point of the prongs, much as Amene ate her grains of rice after her previous feast with the ghoul. Miss Pole sighed over her delicate young peas as she left them on one side of her plate untasted, for they would drop between the prongs. I looked at my host. The peas were going wholesale into his capacitous mouth, shoveled up by his large round-ended knife. I saw, I imitated, I survived. My friends, in spite of my precedent, could not muster up courage enough to do an ungenteel thing. And if Mr. Holbrook had not been so heartily hungry, he would probably have seen that the good peas went away almost untouched. After dinner, a clay pipe was brought in, and a spittoon, and asking us to retire to another room, where he would soon join us if we disliked tobacco smoke, he presented his pipe to Miss Matty and requested her to fill the bowl. This was a compliment to a lady in his youth, but it was rather inappropriate to propose it as an honor to Miss Matty, who had been trained by her sister to hold smoking of every kind in utter abhorrence. But if it was a shock to her refinement, it was also a gratification to her feelings to be thus selected. So she daintily stuffed the strong tobacco into the pipe, and then we withdrew. "It is very pleasant dining with a bachelor," said Miss Matty softly, as we settled ourselves in the counting-house. "I only hope it is not improper. So many pleasant things are." "What a number of books he has," said Miss Pole, looking round the room, "and how dusty they are." "I think it must be like one of the great Dr. Johnson's rooms," said Miss Matty. "What a superior man your cousin must be." "Yes," said Miss Pole, "he's a great reader, but I am afraid he has got into very uncouth habits with living alone." "Oh, uncouth is too hard a word. I should call him eccentric. Very clever people always are," replied Miss Matty. When Mr. Holbrook returned, he proposed a walk in the fields, but the two elder ladies were afraid of damp and dirt, and had only very unbecoming caloshes to put on over their caps, so they declined, and I was again his companion in a turn, which he said he was obliged to take to see after his men. He strode along, either wholly forgetting my existence, or soothed into silence by his pipe, and yet it was not silence exactly. He walked before me with a stooping gait, his hands clasped behind him, and, as some tree or cloud or glimpse of distant upland pasture struck him, he quoted poetry to himself, saying it out loud in a grand, sonorous voice, with just the emphasis that true feeling and appreciation give. We came upon an old cedar tree, which stood at one end of the house. The cedar spreads his dark green layers of shade. capital term, wonderful man." I did not know whether he was speaking to me or not, but I put in an assenting wonderful, although I knew nothing about it, just because I was tired of being forgotten and of being consequently silent. He turned sharp round. "Aye, you may say wonderful. Why, when I saw the review of his poems in Blackwood, I set off within an hour and walked 7 miles to Misselton, for the horses were not in the way, and ordered them. Now, what color are ash buds in March?" "Is the man going mad?" thought I. "He is very like Don Quixote." "What color are they, I say?" repeated he vehemently. "I am sure I don't know, sir," said I, with the meekness of ignorance. "I knew you didn't. No more did I, an old fool that I am, till this young man comes and tells me. Black as ash buds